I'm delighted to welcome you now to our afternoon panel discussion, Amplifying Diverse Voices and Leveraging Our Differences to Drive Success. Our panel, yes, they are, I did check, they're all sitting in the order I've got here. So to my left, we've got Jazz Bogle, the Deputy Director at the Civil Service Diversity and Inclusion team in the Cabinet Office. There is Sean McNally, the Chief Executive from the Legal Aid Agency, Baljit Upe, Director of Public Prosecution and Inclusion at the Crown Prosecution Service, and Jackie Wright, the Chief Digital and Information Officer at HMRC. So I'm going to ask Jazz to start. Thank you.
Good afternoon. How are you all? How are you all? Excellent, excellent. Hopefully you've all enjoyed your lunch. It looks like you've had a fantastic morning, and I'm really, really gutted not to have been able to join you this morning. I think one of the things that I've really grown to appreciate about the conferences that Dod's run around women in leadership are the conversations over the years, I think, have become more and more about the diversity among us as women and the role that we play in life. And I think there's some real, just thinking about the conversations that we've had over time is one of the things that I reflected on as I was preparing for this discussion. So I'm, as Fiona said, I'm Jazz Bogle. I work at the Cabinet Office and I'm responsible for diversity and inclusion for the Civil Service. And this is part of the wider work that we're doing across Civil Service HR to strategically look at how are we here in the civil service? What's our job here in the wider world? And are we fit for purpose for doing that? And one of the things that I was reflecting on was how we are a reflection of the society that we serve. We're part of that society. And it's one of the things that I find, and it's kind of over the last few weeks where I've been speaking at various things and writing various things and listening to other people speaking, has been very often what we do in the civil service is kind of think about the work we're doing as some abstract thing from ourselves. And one of the things that I find really grounding in my day-to-day is to think about, well, I'm the subject matter of the thing I'm interested in. I'm a woman from an ethnic minority background. I went to a pretty crummy school in South East London. I have all of these other factors that go on in my life that I'm trying to understand and address for the people that I work with and I work for, and right now I'm working for you and your colleagues. But actually, I'm also a punter of the thing I'm trying to do, and actually there's some self-reflection that I kind of need to do day to day, and I think we all can. So that's kind of, I suppose, my own diverse voice, and amplifying that in my day job and the day-to-day things that I do is something that I'm kind of needing to remind myself of doing. And it sounds so obvious, doesn't it? But I think very often what we tend to do in our day-to-day jobs is kind of think of the public we're serving as a cohort of people, and we've kind of we make it a very abstract kind of thing from ourselves, and that's something that I think our differences can drive success. I've dived straight in, haven't I? So things for me, are, what I've been thinking about, and what I'd like to talk to you about very briefly, is this kind of, how is it we are operating in the civils? How are we bringing ourselves to that work? What's the impact and the power of our own personal leadership as people who work in the civil service? So one of the things I was reflecting on was around, we talk about masking in the civil service quite a lot, and how when we're at work we try to act in a certain way that might not be the way in which we are. We're kind of choosing to adopt behaviours that we think might be the behaviours that are recognised as successful as good leadership, and they might not be how we operate, but we think we might need to act a bit more macho, or I might need to act a bit posher, or I might need to sound and mask my accent, not say which kind of school I went to and whether or not I went to university. These sorts of things, the expectations that we have around us in work and the way in which we operate and behave. And actually one of the things that struck me was I grew up in a household, a community, my upbringing. It was I was very particular way at school. I hung out with my white friends and talked about music that we were all into and wore certain clothes at school, and I'd come home and I'd speak Punjabi, I'd wear a salwar kameez, I would speak differentially to elders and in a particular way. And I had these two different lives, and you wouldn't recognise one from the other. They'd be very, very different. And actually, that's not a problem. I've grown up, when at the time it was hard work and really confusing, and you're going through everything else that you go through when you're a young person going into your teens. And actually, as I've got older, what I've realised, it's made me incredibly flexible, really agile. I can actually fit into pretty much most environments. There are some that I'd probably choose not to fit into, but generally, I'm pretty agile, and that's a difference that I've grown up with. And actually, had I held on to how I felt about that as I was growing up, I might not be bringing that to the table now and being able to bring that as my personal value and brand to the work that I can do. The rest of my theme is about kind of what I've learned about diversity and inclusion and the difference that I bring to the world. And I realise that we kind of are in different stages. I think there are 3 stages to understanding the kind of difference that we bring and what it feels like, what it means to bring difference. I think there is kind of stage 1, if you like, is about responding to the stereotype. So we have this idea that a certain kind of, images of, say, the Muslim fundamentalist or the Indian doctor or the black drug dealer. So these are the kind of stereotypes that we see, particularly in the media and the world around us. We respond to them day to day in our work, and that's how we process the world around us sometimes. That's kind of stage 1. Hopefully that's long gone. We've moved on from that, and that's part of our evolution, and that's something that actually most of us have woken up, smelt the coffee and worked out that's not true. Stage 2, I think, is where we're testing that, and I think that's where most of us are. I think most of us are now testing those stereotypes. We're actually realising that actually those stereotypes isn't the world around us, and we really do need to take a very more nuanced view of the world and understand that in a different way, and our own reflection in that as well. And I think where we're going is to a stage 3, where we're beginning to normalise. It shouldn't be unusual that we're approaching half of us are in the SES are women, sorry. We're far away from half of us coming from ethnic minority backgrounds. But it shouldn't be an exceptional thing that we're seeing more leadership that looks more diverse in our civil service. That should be the normal that we should be expecting. But I think we're still away from that, and I guess I'll end on that point. My stage 3 is where I'd like us to get to. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Sean McNally, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Legal Aid Agency. I'm probably the least well-equipped person to speak to you today, but it does sort of remind me in terms of what it must have been like. I remember when I started off in the civil service back in 1985 at Newcastle County Court, and I would go to a meeting, and at that meeting, it was predominantly white, middle-aged men, and if I was lucky, there was one woman there. How it must have felt for that person coming into that environment. So I firmly believe that in a leadership role and the leadership responsibility that is incumbent upon me is to provide and create an environment that is diverse, is inclusive, and there is proper gender balance and representative of the society that we serve. So if I think back about who have been the most influential people in my life, they've been women. I start with my mum. I grew up on a council estate. We didn't have very much money. In fact, the majority of people that lived round and about us were second, third generation unemployed, and had a different moral compass to the one that was instilled upon me by my mum. She was a kidney transplant patient. She had a triple heart bypass. She suffered many ailments, but never once complained. She said to me, "You can do anything that you put your mind to, but be considerate and kind to people." I remember one day when I was out walking down in the estate, and the group of, I'd say friends, they decided to go one way, and what stopped me was the thought of the look on my mother's face as I walked down the path where I said I'd gone wrong. So she really helped me to understand that I could do something. Then the next person was that I was really fortunate to have a senior leader, a woman, who saw potential in me that I didn't see? How many of you have been in a group and thought, I'm going to be silent? They thought that they were having an inclusive conversation. And it was an inclusive conversation from their perspective about whether they'd been to what they did at university and what they then subsequently went on to do. And I was stood there being rather silent. I didn't want to say that I hadn't been to university, and there was this little voice in the back of my head saying imposter. What was different was I was the area director at the time, and I was a member of the SCS. So I'm thinking in that place about actually, should I be proud of the fact that my background and my experience determines who I am? And at that time, I didn't have the confidence that I've got now to share the fact that for me, my route to get to me to where I am has been as a consequence of people seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself, and people, interestingly women, saying to me in senior leadership roles, lift your head up and have a look, and don't be apologetic for who you are. Celebrate and share the fact that your career journey and the stories that you tell and the way you approach issues is a consequence of the life experiences that you've had. And then the other person is my daughter, 22-year-old, not backwards and coming forwards. And if anybody is to tell you which way is the right way, she is. And she does it in a very determined, a very forthright way. And I know where I come in the household, which is behind the children, behind the wife, behind the dog and the 2 cats. But really, no, seriously, for me, the issue is that as leaders, we've got to create the environment that enables people to realize their full potential. So wherever you start out in life should not determine where you end up. And what's the business sense for me looking at it? Well, actually, the better outcomes are arrived at and are achieved as a consequence of having diversity of thought, diversity of views, different perspectives being shone onto a particular issue or a particular problem. And I believe that as leaders, we have to challenge ourselves at times to ask ourselves, is my team diverse? Does my team look more like me, heaven forbid? Are the attributes and skills and experiences across the team, do they enable us to strive for better outcomes? And do people feel able to say to me, Sean, you're wrong. Sean, there may be a different and a better way. So that's one of the reasons why I am absolutely committed to saying that it's he for she and she for he. I believe, and in terms of my responsibility, is to ensure that I have a gender balance and a diverse organisation at every level. But that assumes that everybody starts out in the same place in life, and of course we don't. There are people who got really good polish. I use the word polish, who can charm and have got the skills and the words. And there are others who perhaps have a different accent or have a different educational background, who with help and support will be able to work within that environment and on that stage. So I think, for my organisation and for the Ministry of Justice, as social mobility champion, I think it is incumbent not just to think about mentoring, but also to really think about sponsorship. Who is going to promote you, me, and everybody else within the workplace? Who is going to speak well for you? Do you know where to go if you need help, support, or if you need to work on a particular skill set? Where do I need to go? And as a leader, we have to create that opportunity. So not just going out into schools and colleges and promoting the work of the civil service, but what is the in-reach, the support strategy for each and every one of us? I'd also say that, the worst thing that somebody should say to me is, "You'll never do that, Sean." And I think, okay, then somebody's got to break through the barrier. You think about Roger Bannister in terms of breaking the 4-minute mile. That was a big thing. But then somebody went on. I can't remember the person's name. It's funny that, isn't it, that you remember the first person that did it. The person that then went on, they actually absolutely nailed it. So I think, for me, I've got to say, if I can stand here as somebody who joined the civil service as an administrative officer, whose horizon and ambition at the time was probably to get to SCO. I remember the guy's name, Harry Parkin, he was the chief clerk. That was the limit of my ambition at the age of 18. Thankfully, somebody caused and encouraged me to think differently and not to accept things the way that they are. I've always got, even though my mum isn't here with me, she is the one person that's constantly driving me on. And then just to reflect, when I did go to be appointed as area director for Merseyside, I remember I took a call from somebody who I thought was a friend, who said, "Sean, think about the jobs that you've done. If you take that job, it'll kill you." And I said, "No, I can really make a real difference. We can turn that organisation round." I did, though. That planted a seed of doubt. And thankfully, Chris Meyer, who then went on to be the Chief Executive of Her Majesty's Court Service, really said, "Sean, give yourself a shake." That was effectively what she said. But I can't stand here and say all I can do is share my story. But the one thing that I would share with you is take every opportunity and don't let yourself be constrained by barriers that you believe or that are in place. Constantly push, constantly challenge, and challenge people like me to help remove and to lift those barriers if they are there. And then finally, I'm going to share with you something that my gran shared with me many years ago, and that was shy Bairns getting out. So, if nothing else, take responsibility and really sort of make a difference. Thank you.
It's an absolute privilege to be here today and to speak to you. And I'm going to share my personal story of, I suppose, learning and growing as a human being in the context of diversity. So just a little bit about me. I've worked for the CPS now for 26 years. I joined as a legal trainee all those years ago, and I thought I would just get qualified and leave, and here I am. And I've had some amazing roles within the CPS, both as a frontline prosecutor, being in court, reviewing really serious cases, to being a diversity manager, doing policy work, and being a chief Crown prosecutor, and also now in my current role, a national role of Director of Prosecution Policy and Inclusion. And that's, I have to say, a really fun role because it brings together a lot of the things that I really care about. Just a little bit of background. I was born in 1969, so I have a special birthday coming up next year. I grew up in East London, and I come from a Punjabi Sikh family like Jazz, so some of her story really resonates with me, and I'll be touching on some similar experiences. What I thought I would do is just share with you a snippet of sort of 4 areas in the context of diversity and the challenges that I faced while I was studying, so before I got to work. And that's the challenge of colour, the challenge of culture, the challenge of gender, and the challenge of class. all of which were a feature of who I am and where I grew up. So I'll start with colour, and I'll share with you some of my experiences at primary school. So bear in mind, this is the sort of 1970s in East London. Skinheads were very much in vogue then. So we used to have situations where sometimes the Asian kids had to be sent home early because there was a rumour that the skinheads were going to come and beat them up. I experienced racial abuse, being spat at. So I associated at a young age colour with fear of personal safety, whether that's physical or verbal abuse. Moving on to culture, and I'll pick an example from when I was at secondary school, because I've got an older sister who is 4 years older than me, so she was in the sixth form when I was in sort of the second year. Culture, and I lived two parallel lives too, and I just want to share something about my mum. Two things about my mum. She's a fantastic cook, so we have the most amazing Indian food. And she's a really good singer and loves Bollywood. So we were brought up on a rich diet of amazing food, Bollywood, and singing and dancing, and I loved every minute of it. But that was very much in my private space. And my sister, who's completely different to me, so interesting about stereotypes, we're not all the same. I've got an older sister who responded to being different in a very different way. She would wear Indian clothes because you didn't have to have a uniform in the sixth form. And I remember one time she did a Bollywood dance at our school assembly, and I wanted the ground to swallow me up. I was so embarrassed. I thought, why is she my sister? It's interesting, and I love dancing myself. Then I'm going to talk about an experience about gender, because I went to a further education college, East Ham College, to do my A-levels. Now, the gender makeup in East Ham College was probably about 95% men and about 5% women. And that was a whole new experience because I'd gone to an all-girls school up until then. And what I learnt then was similar, actually, to some of the things around fear of personal safety, but now in the context of sexual harassment, but also violence. I mean, I saw girls being assaulted. There were no-go areas in my college. You had to be really on it to navigate through that safely. So that was my experience of gender challenges. I was then really fortunate. I did really well in my A-levels, and I got to do a law degree at LSE. And it was fascinating. I remember thinking at LSE, I was saying to my friend who also came from the same college, oh, we can wander around everywhere here. There's nowhere that we can't go. But it was the first time social class, I felt it. I felt the wealth of other people. I felt the way other people spoke. And I thought, God, they're cleverer than me. And it was interesting because I met all these Asians thinking I would have an affinity with them, had absolutely nothing in common with them. They were from these really wealthy families, and they thought Bhangra dancing was vulgar, which is terrible because I was a Bhangra dancing queen in East London. So that was not good. So my way of coping with all of this was to try and become a bit invisible and fit in. And I agree with Jazz, it makes you agile, you can fit into any environment, it makes you very flexible. So there's some real skills that you learn from that. But I'm going to share with you a couple of Maya Angelou quotes, because I thought it would add some sparkle to my story. So I thought, if you found my story boring, you're not going to find her quotes boring. And she says, if you are always trying to be normal, you will never know how amazing you can be. And I think after spending the first 25 years of my life trying to fit in and, I've spent the last 24 very much learning to be myself and being very, very proud of who I am and what I stand for. And some of my values, which have been shaped by those experiences, are around fairness, equality, and justice. And so it's fantastic that someone like me with those values has spent 26 years working in the Crown Prosecution Service. It's a values organisation, and it's a really serious job we do. And I try and bring that experience to bear in my organisation, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes, I have to say, in not so subtle ways. But it's something that I will do tirelessly because I think it's really important. And I know that I had finally arrived in terms of being comfortable in my own skin and celebrating my culture. A couple of years ago, I was Chief Crown Prosecutor for London at the time, and we were having People Month, and we were having this diversity lunch, food from different cultures, and one of my colleagues, who's very cheeky, said, "Baljit, we've got to get you involved in this Bollywood dance." And he did, he persuaded me, and as I walked across Southwark Bridge, the wind was blowing, I was in my sari, which I don't normally wear, so it's hard to navigate, in a sari, carrier bags full of samosas. I was thinking, nobody can say I'm not proud of my culture. And so I've got another Maya Angelou quote for you, and I think it reflects how I feel about myself and how I feel about life. "My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with passion, compassion, some humor, and some style." But the reality is, it's not just me because I'm Asian or a woman that has unique experiences. We've all got unique experiences, so we can all bring diversity of thinking to the party. But what I've also learnt, I suppose, as I'm getting older and possibly wiser, is that in many respects, whilst we are individuals that have unique experiences, we have so much more in common as a human race. And I think it's really important that we focus on what we have in common as well. I think things like love and recognition are fundamental human needs, really. If we were all very enlightened, perhaps we wouldn't need recognition as much, but the reality is affirmation is really important. And you heard that from Sean's story of the affirmation that he got that propelled him on. So I think that is really, really important. And when we talk about love, I'm talking about caring about people, understanding people, having compassion, respecting people, and showing kindness. And I think as we move into a more technological environment, which has so many possibilities and opportunities, being mindful of that and taking time is really important. So I will leave you with my final Maya Angelou quote, and it is this: "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So be mindful of that on your leadership journey.
So I thought about this when I was asked to speak about diversity and women in leadership. I thought to myself, how can I present to you two things? One, my background, because our backgrounds shape what we know. And then two, as a leader, who am I and what will you be as a leader? And so I'll talk a little bit about my background and how it's shaped who I am today and what I've learned about myself and life, and then tell you a little bit about who I think I am and what it means to be a leader in a diverse world. So I'm from London. I'm from Tottenham. My father came over and was part of the Royal Air Force from Jamaica, and he was part of the Windrush, which shaped who I am. And when I listen to Jazz and Baljit about their life experiences, I live in a multicultural world, and I'm like 3-4 people in my household. I moved to the US in my late teens, and when I moved to the US, that for me was a cultural shock. So while I grew up in Tottenham, in a family where my life was about how important it is to study, family is important, how you treat people is very important. When I got to the US, I was a black Brit, spoke funny, never seen a black British girl before, and that was a cultural shock that took me by surprise. It took me by surprise even further when I went to university. And when I got to the university, my roommate said to me, I don't want a nigger as a roommate, and so you'll have to find another roommate. And for me, that was probably the most shocking thing that happened to me, but it was also the most enlightening in terms of I was actually different. And all along, while I was in Tottenham, believe it or not, I thought I belonged, even though I was a black British girl. In the US, at university, my second roommate was white. However, if her parents knew that she was rooming with a black girl, she would have to move. And so I pretended to be somebody else. They never saw me. At the time, I had a really strong British accent, so nobody knew whether I was black or white. And every time her parents came, I just was sick, or I went to get pizza. And for me, the feeling of not being able to be myself, not being able to have people see or know who I am, changed my approach and my view on life dramatically. So from there, finished university, I worked, and it's a long story about how I got into technology. But I will say that when I got into technology, the one thing that I did have was somebody who took me under their wing and said to me, Jackie, I will help you and do whatever it is I can do for you. And that was a woman who today is a very close friend of mine. And what she taught me was, Jackie, you need to be able to reach out, help, bring people along. And frankly speaking, it was an eye-opener for me that somebody actually cared about me who was different from me. From there, I worked progressively, and my parents moved to Florida, and my dad had a stroke. And I had to make a choice about whether to stay at work or go and be with my family. And for me, it was a tough decision, but it was the important decision. I needed to be with my family because that was the most important thing to me. And I would always get a job, but I could never get my father back. And so I left everything, and I went to Florida, and I spent time with my father for the last 6 months of his life. And what that taught me was the importance of what's important and knowing what's important. So throughout that, I still had a career and had children, a family, etc. And I started to become a leader. And as I started to become a leader, I kind of forgot what I really valued about the things that shaped my life. And so one day I became a really recent new manager. I went into a meeting. I was all by myself in that meeting, the only woman of color, and they were all men in there. And I never said a word in that meeting. And when I came out, my boss said to me, Jackie, why didn't you speak in that meeting? And I said, well, got all these men who are there trying to get their words across. I can't get a word in edgewise. And he said, well, Jackie, I hired you for what you bring to the table. And you have a seat at the table as much as anybody else. You may be the quietest voice in the room, but you probably have the biggest brain in the room. So what can we do to make sure that you contribute? And I said, okay, why don't we do this? And he said to me, okay, if you want to say something, just give me a nod or a wink, and I'll include you in the meeting. And so we had this thing going, nod, wink, if I wanted to say something. So Jackie, tell me, what would you like? What are your thoughts? And what that taught me was how to include people, the quietest voice in the room. If you're afraid of speaking, how do you make sure that that voice is heard? My second one was I became a middle manager. And as a middle manager, I was traveling quite extensively. I was getting on the first flight Monday morning to Minneapolis, and I was coming back Friday evening every week. And I hired a young lady who wanted to, in effect, be my understudy. And what she did was she traveled with me every Monday, came back every Friday, and we were doing this all along. We were doing this together. One day she came into my office crying, and she said, Jackie, I can't do this anymore. And I said, what do you mean you can't do this anymore? She said, I have 2 young children. I cannot get up every Monday, fly with you, and fly back every Friday. And I said to her, well, I didn't expect you to. She said, you didn't? I said, no, I didn't. What that taught me was I thought I was leading by example, but the wrong example. And as a leader, I needed to be cognizant of her life, her experiences, and what she really wanted in life. These are the things that culminated, that took me to a point where I recognized that who I am, what I am, and the things that I do are really important in terms of shaping my life and shaping the experiences of the employees that I have. So with all that, which is a snippet based on the time frame, what does that mean in terms of who am I and what will I be? I am a woman, I'm a woman of color, and I'm a technologist. How many of you, if you saw me walking outside, would know that I was the most senior black female technologist at Microsoft? How many of you would even imagine that I would have been that? How many men, when I'm having a conversation with them, actually acknowledged that I am a technologist that knows just as much as they? So my job as a leader going forward is threefold. One is, how do I make sure that I have a diverse group, a diverse team, a diverse leadership team, and I include everybody, no matter their walk of life, their experiences, who they are, their thoughts, their orientation. I include everybody. Secondly, how do I create an environment where everybody can be themselves? How do I create this space? How do I become inclusive? How do I make sure that when I speak, I am speaking for the masses, but I'm also including everybody's voice, and everybody's voice is being heard? How do I make sure, finally, that I leave a legacy where everybody, when I turn around and when I part from my role, that everybody can feel, be who they want to be, and can be representative of everybody in society? So for me, leadership is about how I attract, how I create an environment that's diverse, and how do I make sure every voice is heard? And with that, I'll part.
Thank you very much indeed to all of our speakers for their contributions and for sharing with us their personal experiences as well, which is very much appreciated too. I'm pleased to say, I think probably for the first time today, actually, we're not under such significant pressure on the time. I'm not going to be geeing them along, so we do have time for some questions. We've got the microphones there ready. So if you can, yep, here we go, just in the middle there, and your name and where you're from, please.
Anna Poynton from Horwich Farrelly. I'd just like to say thank you to all the panel for sharing such amazing stories. It's been really inspirational to listen to. You've all talked about creating that inclusive environment, and we're at the beginning of a journey of trying to create that inclusive environment at work. I was wondering if you could give us your top tip for creating that environment in the workplace where everybody feels included.
Maybe take another question as well. See. Just at the front here, yes. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emma Mudger-Smith. I work at the Cabinet Office. I just want to echo what that lady said. There were truly inspirational speeches that you gave there. Really did resonate with us, kind of where you've come from, where you are now. I'd be interested to know, because you are quite inspirational leaders and you are role modelling the behaviours that others should be following, how are we penetrating that across government? Because it's not the case in every department that we've got these sort of leaders. So what can we do, and how are you going about that in other departments? Thank you.
Thank you. Should we start there? Start with Jazz?
Sure, yeah, sure. So to answer the first question, I mean, and it kind of links to the second question, really. I think it's what you're describing, how do we kickstart that energy? I think it's got to start somewhere, and I think a lot of it. So we've got, I suppose, the infrastructure in place. So now certainly all the SES, but also, I mean, what we're trying to encourage is everybody should be thinking about their personal objectives, and they need to, so all SES are required to have inclusion and diversity personal objectives. Those should be about delivery of their departmental or organisational strategies and objectives that are around diversity and inclusion. So it's got to be connected to the business. This isn't just about kind of the wider stuff. I think some of the stuff that I'm hearing, some of those objectives sounds a really good start. So lots of people are talking about, well, I'm going to commit to mentoring somebody that's really different to me, or I'm going to think about some training that we can do as a team together because we've got a collective issue that we've got to deal with. That's the kind of thing that I'm beginning to hear about. So some of that kick-starting some ideas and stuff. I think actually the main thing is just having the confidence to have the conversation. And I think very often what I see, certainly on my travels and around the place, and certainly over the last few of these and also Civil Service Live and everywhere else we've been talking to colleagues, one of the things that comes out quite strongly is the nervousness people have talking about diversity and inclusion. There's this fear of the language not quite getting right and that kind of stuff. And I think what we should try and understand and realise is that actually we've been talking about this for very, very, very many years. It's got to be upwards of 30 years. Even the civil service has been talking about this to varying degrees about different things. Gender we've been talking about for many years. Other aspects slightly fewer, but this is a journey. We're in that journey. So I think there's a kind of the creating the inclusive environment starts from being able to talk about it, allowing time and space to do that. And then I think the leadership things are just really being able to dig deep. So we've put in place, following the strategy we published last year, a whole range of different things. For example, like I say, the SES objectives. We've just, or your departments have agreed targets on representation, so the diversity bit, the who's here in the civil service, particularly in the SES, and we're driving some of that. And I think there's more pressure. At the moment what we're hearing is lots and lots of recognition and understanding at the very top level. So your permanent secretaries bought in. They're absolutely bought into this. We've done lots of work with them. And what I'm really interested to see, and there's, 800 of you in the room here? You're all advocates for diversity and inclusion. You can all drive change. It's not going to happen because I'm talking to you about it, as inspirational as I like to think we are. And the permanent secretaries, actually, it's all of you that's going to make the change, and your colleagues. And I think sitting in rooms like this is really important and really great. And what we want to make sure is that you feel that you've got something to take back with you that you can take and drive some change where you are. Thank you.
Yeah. For me, I think the change has to start with me. If I'm leading, and I'd say that it's for all of us as well. If I'm leading a team, I have to, by my actions, be the change that I want to see. Jackie mentioned about your recruitment policy. So if I am bringing somebody into the organisation, that hire, people will look and make a judgment on the people that I'm bringing in. If I'm saying that I've got an inclusive environment for people for the management or leadership team meetings, and they experience something totally different. For example, the one thing that I changed straight away was this system whereby whoever was presenting waited at the door before they actually came in. My view is they can come into my exec leadership team whenever they want to. If they're early, come in and have a seat at the table. If they've got something to contribute or something that they want to say, then I give them permission to say that. And giving permission, and people generally don't take it, but permission to stay if they want to. And then I scratch my head when they say, no, Sean, I've got other things to do, I'm gonna get off. It is about setting the tone and being aware that actually I am on view all of the time. And I cannot, if I behave in a way that's inconsistent with what I'm trying to lead and achieve with the team. So this isn't just me. You've got to get the whole team buying into changing and recognizing there is a different way of working. Then that's where the momentum starts to build and grow. And me going out into the organization and saying, do you know what? If it's not like that for you, then please challenge it and change it. And if I may, just sharing a story about when I was area director in Merseyside. As you walk around the offices, and as leaders you do this, you walk around and you can see people saying, I don't want to talk to him today, I'm busy, I've got a job that I want to do. And I just stuck with it. And I spoke to this person and I said, why is it that you've got the 5-bar gates on your chart on the wall? She said, Sean, I can't wait until I get out of this organisation. I'm counting down the days to retirement. 3 months passed, and I had what was called a question time like meeting, where people could come along and ask the leadership team at the time any questions that they wanted to of us. It wasn't scripted. Questions didn't have to be submitted in advance. People could ask anything that they wanted to, including personal questions. It was free. There was no rules. She came up to me and said, "Sean, I'm not feeling very well today. 3 months ago, I'd have been off sick. But I wanted to come in to say thank you. I now understand how I can contribute to the work of the team, of the office, of the organisation. I now feel included. I feel part of something." All I'd done was change the leadership team in that office. What a difference that made to that person. And that is one of the things that will constantly drive me to ensure that we, or I as a leader, have a proper, inclusive environment. And then how do we share it? We share our stories. People like myself and others speaking and sharing their experiences that then encourages others to do likewise.
I think in terms of a sort of top tip for inclusion, it's hard to answer in the abstract because it kind of depends where your organisation already is. I think some key ingredients though, and Sean's touched upon it, it's leadership. So you've got to have leadership that really wants to make that change, and that's then got to be demonstrated with behaviours. And inclusion then has to be an issue of strategic significance to the organisation, so it's got to be on the board agenda, and it's got to be a golden thread that runs through everything. In the CPS, we've just launched our inclusion and community engagement strategy, which looks at the people aspects, but also looks at what we do, which is casework. We prosecute cases, that's what CPS does, but also then how we engage with the public. And we've pulled that together in one strategy because we know those different aspects interlink. I think if you're struggling to get people motivated and engaged, then obviously you need to think about how you make that business case. And there's countless examples out there of the business case for diversity. So I think it's just working out where your organization's at. Is it that people are willing, but they just need a structure, or is it that you need to get them to buy into it? But it's got to be at the top of the agenda, and it's got to cut through everything. It can't be the add-on that we talk about because, you know, it's a nice thing to do. It's about mainstreaming inclusion, if that makes sense. And then about how we do it more widely across the whole civil service. I mean, I think that is a big job, and as Jazz says, it's a journey. But we do have opportunities. So I'm also the race champion for the CPS. So I go to meetings with other race champions across the civil service, and we've just started now doing some of that, sharing best practice, or different departments are saying, well, this is what we're trying to do. And I think that is quite useful. CPS is in quite a fortunate position. Our data is pretty good. We've got a strong track record in this area. But we can still learn from other departments. There are still new things that other people are doing. So I think sharing those stories and using race champions or gender champions to do that is really important. And I'm also head of policy profession for the CPS, so I go to the head of policy professions meeting, and we've actually set up a diversity and inclusion subgroup because actually the policy profession across the board at the senior levels is not very diverse, so there's a lot of work to do there. So it's incumbent upon people like me to do something about that. And one thing I would say, and I think the CPS has got a really good track record of doing this, and I think it's something that we should, and I'm sure other departments do it as well, but that engaging with the public. So as we're at a women's conference, if I think about what we in the CPS do about engaging with women's organisations around our violence against women and girls agenda, we do a huge amount of work, and we've got some really strong partnerships where they really help us make better policy. They explain to us how controversial decisions, people may react to them. They give us insights that we would not necessarily have. And I think promoting the value of engaging with different groups also really enhances diversity.
You know, that's really interesting. Everybody's talking about the mechanisms, the process, and diversity is at the top of the agenda for just about everybody, whether you're in civil service or not. And so the question is, what is it that we can do to actually move the dial? And for me, you know, my top tip for me, at least for me, is take leadership personally. Everyone is a leader. And when you take leadership personally and you internalize it, you say to yourself, what is it that I need to do? And in that regard, there are some key things for me that I think are important. I think setting the tone as a leader is important. Walk the talk, lead by example, and recognize that as a leader, each and every one of you, what you represent and the tone you set. The second one is create a movement. I might sound a bit rebellious, but I firmly believe that the way to change anything is by creating a movement around it. And so we have the luxury now of we have mechanisms and processes in place that recognize we need to do things. Let's create the movement that will move that trajectory and move it at pace. And then the final one for me is about removing barriers. In a time when you want to make change and you want to move at pace, there are major barriers to how we recruit, how we promote, you know, all of these things, and we need to be able to remove those barriers. And I think if we focus on some of those core things, I think we'll be in a much better place.
Thank you. If I might just pick up on that last point, actually, because a lot of what we've spoken about so far has been about those who are already within our organisations and improving diversity through throughout the organisations. But I wonder what your thoughts are about how we improve diversity and wider inclusion in terms of our recruitment practices and how we attract more people in.
Yeah. So I have a few views. Just a few. You know, Sean mentioned storytelling. Telling your story is important. And when you tell the story, you tell it with people who look like the people you want to attract. I mean, let's take an example. When I walk into a room of senior leaders, if I see no one that looks like me, I say to myself, Jackie doesn't really say, but let's just work through it. I'll say to myself, wait a second, there's no opportunity here for me because look at what the leadership is. And I think if you think about the people we're attracting, if they don't see people that look like themselves, if you can see it, you can be it, we need to figure out how we do that. How we recruit in terms of our positions and how we advertise. There's clear data around what women perceive as they apply for a job versus as men, you know, and women do not think they can do it all, whereas the man may say, yep, I can do it all. And so making these positions friendly for people is also important. I'm the disability champion for my organization, and the one area that I do think that we also need to think about is what is that? What does that mean? And making sure that we include that as part of our storytelling and as part of how we present and promote ourselves. Thank you.
So I agree with everything that Jackie has said. For me, it is about looking for, and within the Ministry of Justice, as Social Mobility Champion, we have now over 600 volunteers who are working with schools where the highest population of people are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. They have engaged in 2 years with around about 27,000 pupils. Now, to my mind, if we change one person's life in terms of their hopes and aspirations, I think that that's worth doing. But of itself, it's not enough. So what do? We've got it linked into work experience programs, a proper program of sponsorship and mentoring to help people to understand and even taking them through the application process for jobs. But then challenge ourselves and say, is the methodology by which we currently recruit and select into our organization, does that put people off? And if so, why? Does that enable people to demonstrate their true potential? Which is why I think we're moving in a positive direction about success profiles. But within the Legal Aid Agency, I said we're not going to do any more competence-based recruitment. it's going to be strength-based recruitment and selection into the organisation. And then I think the other thing that we are doing is partnering with the likes of EY and Bradford in helping to work in an intensive way with a group of people, and School 21. So to my mind, it is about making sure that we've got as diverse a possible reach, and that we do challenge ourselves. I mean, how many people, when you say, oh, I understand in terms of the recruitment processes, but if you then look on the website, as I did when we were starting to look and address issues around social mobility, I found it impenetrable. So what was anybody else going to think? We changed it. And I think that's, as leaders, what we have to do.
I just want to add, I think Sean brings up a really good point, because if you go out into the schools or into the communities, I find that a lot of our young folks don't even know what the civil service holds from a career perspective. And when you think about the apprenticeships, etc., those are great opportunities, but they don't know they exist. And so how are we doing that outreach to make sure that they also know that it's a great place to work?
Is there anything you wanted to add on?
I guess I just want to really emphasise the point about our brand as a civil service, and we're not a single brand, obviously. We all come from different bits of the civil service, we all relate to the civil service in different ways. The civil service has a footprint in the country in different ways, and I think there's this kind of how are we, in terms of our work as recruiters, as people that we're wanting to draw into the civil service, but actually also in our day-to-day outward-facing policy delivery work. So I'm just thinking, my background's in the Department of Health, and from our point of view, we did lots of work with kind of health protection and health promotion in schools and children. And actually a lot of that, so it's an in with us being able to then talk about us as an employer. The work that we offer is good, healthy work. And actually, if we're trying to recruit people into the civil service, it's a bonus. We're a good offer out there potentially for a lot of employers, or prospective employees. So actually we could market ourselves far better. The other thing for me though is also about understanding, as we're talking about diversity, and it's kind of what I do, and actually realising that there are some parts of the communities and some communities themselves would have a particular perspective and view. And interestingly, we've had some conversations recently, and it'd be interesting to see what you think. Some people have been talking to us about people that are new into the UK, for example, that come from other countries where their concept of the civil service is something actually really negative. So very often in other parts of the world, their experience of the civil service is something that isn't what our civil service is. Actually, they'll have a very different experience very often. How can we bust some of those myths? How can we actually help people understand what it is we do? And this point about Sean, I'm going to pick up on Sean's point about the opportunities to work with. There are lots of charities and organisations out there that are chomping at the bit to find really great placements for highly talented, particularly young people who are from a variety of different backgrounds, underrepresented in the civil service. We've got potentially quite a lot of opportunity to access into some of those charities. And so if you're thinking of ideas and practical things that you might want to take back to the ranch, finding locally where some of those charities are would be a really, really good start. Certainly in London, we've got some names and numbers of people that I'm sure would be really glad of some contacts and links. So if anyone fancies any, get hold of me. It's easy. I'm going to do a plug, if you don't mind. It's inclusion@cabinetoffice.gov.uk. It's really easy. Email that and that will find me, and we're really happy to put people in touch with some of those charities.
I've done a few plugs today, so I think it's only fair. We have time for some more questions. Oh, lots of hands now. Okay, we have a lady in a pink, red jacket here. And then we'll take one of the ones from the middle there.
Hi, I'm Nikki Burdett, and I'm actually an imposter myself because I'm not civil service, so thank you for letting me come today. And my question to the panel is about what you've been talking about in terms of recruitment. We've heard a lot about the fast stream, we've heard a lot about the apprenticeships, we've heard about growing your own talent, but and in terms of diversity, but what I haven't heard anything about is diversity in terms of age and recruitment. So what I'd like to ask the panel is, what is happening to those people that are coming from industry, perhaps, or from MOD, like myself, in terms of how do you grow them over? How do you steal them from other areas to make sure that you're maintaining diversity from now on, not just from growing it from youth?
Thank you. And we'll take one of the hands there, maybe the one in the front, still with the hand up.
Hello, my name's Charlotte Coulton-Scott. I work for the Crown Prosecution Service. I wondered what you all felt was your single biggest achievement in terms of diversity and inclusion, or in terms as a leader, and also why you felt it was.
Thank you. Okay. Who wants to go first?
Shall I do the pulling in the diversity from
Yep.
a strategic point of view? There's lots of things that are going on. So hopefully most of you... So I think this concept around age is really interesting. And obviously now we've removed the cap on retirement, and all of that means a different deal now for us in the civil service. And one of the concepts around age isn't only about ageing. Age is... we think about that certainly in the conversations I've been having in our little world around life course, I suppose, career course, if you think about it in that way. And so a few things come to mind really around permeability, helping people feel a lot more opportunity in moving agilely around the civil service in particular, but also permeate within and outside the civil service and come back and bring different skills. So actually, how can we be far more flexible about supporting individuals to find new opportunities and new moves elsewhere, broaden their horizons, more strings to their bow type thing? What that does for our organisations is bring a much richer experienced workforce, and that's got to be a really, really good bonus. So that's a kind of a principle that we're applying across the board, and we tend to find that's the kind of thing that is actually really quite attractive, so secondments and that sort of thing. The other things that kind of we're saying, over the last couple of years, there's been quite a lot of talk about returnships, and actually thinking about particularly women, but actually anybody really that's had an extended period of time outside of the labour force and wants to come back, usually because they've had some caring responsibility or some reason to be away from work, and needing to come back into work, usually in a way that helps support them back into work, rather than they've come from a career move, like they've not just finished doing their PhD and they're coming to find a job. It's not that kind of time out of work. Actually, it's more actually I've spent 6 years caring for a relative that was sick and passed away, and now I want to come back to work. And how can we help people find their way back? These are very, very often more likely to be women than men. And so actually, how are we finding that? And we're a really good employer in that way. So we've actually got an enormous amount of opportunity to bring people back into the workforce and help them engage. The other thing that we found as well is that there are some professions where we found that actually we've been a far more attractive option as an employer that allows a far more flexible way of working in order to kind of fit other aspects of work-life balance into their lives. And so actually what we found is that there are quite a few sectors outside of the civil service where we've been able to draw, in particular, quite a lot more women into our industry. So one of the areas is the legal profession. So we know that quite a lot of people that have decided to join the legal profession mid-career have done so because they don't want to continue working under the pressures that a commercial environment requires you to work under, and they find the work-life balance. And also, especially in law, you get to make law here, not just practice it. So actually you get to do actually really quite interesting, really quite interesting things. And the other thing that we're finding as well is that very often people have got to their careers in various stages, particularly again outside of the public sector, and they want to come in, and they've kind of got to that stage where they're really interested in that value-based experience of working and having that real opportunity to make that big public impact and have some value base in their work. And so we're very attractive there, and one of the things that we're doing really proactively is thinking about how we're actively using that as a lever to bring diversity in particular at those very senior executive levels. Jackie's actually part of our task force that is talking about that, which is a really exciting thing. So there's some really good, interesting things going on.
So for me, in thinking about age, actually, don't see age, see ability and potential wherever that might be, but recognise that some people will have either a conscious or an unconscious bias drawn out by age. One of the most inspirational stories I heard was of a lady who was embarking upon what was a third career. All of the skills that she was bringing into that role, and she was embracing the fact that she was on an apprenticeship. She was 60-year-old. Real sort of potential, and just think about how she would enrich any team. So I think it comes again, it's a leadership challenge, and to ask yourself, you know, are we really, when we're saying we're inclusive, are we truly inclusive, or are we making judgments about somebody's age, rather than looking at the skills and the abilities that they bring? When we ask a question, it shouldn't be, you know, what are you doing? It should be, who are you? What do you bring? Can we understand the skills, the attributes, and the life lessons that you're going to bring into a particular role? I wouldn't be arrogant enough to say what I think the greatest achievement is in terms of the organisation. I think we're constantly striving to be an employer of choice within the legal aid agency. I think for me, it is creating and setting a tone, and I believe that we've got a great team and people who really do feel passionate, enthused and engaged working within the legal aid agency. And why do I say that? In an operational organisation with an employee engagement index of 72%, where the vast majority of people are caseworking, but not accepting that you know, you're going to have, in terms of the headquarters, people can have laptops and access to mobile phones, making sure that when we do have a flexible offer, that all of the caseworking applications within the agency are now capable of being accessed electronically. People can work remotely. We're no longer defined by the fabrics of the building, so you've got the flexibility of being able to find the best person, the right person for the role, irrespective of where they live. It's what skills are they going to bring. Why should it be a case that it's somebody in an HQ role, for example, if you've got somebody that an appointment, the boiler breaks down, or you've got to be at home, or you've got to be at home to look after the children, traditionally in HQ roles you've been able to do that because you've got the flexibility. Caseworkers, everybody within the organisation should have exactly the same access, and that's what we've strive to do within the legal aid agency. And I know, because people leave, go to other government departments, and then say, actually, do you know what? I want to come back. I want to work in a supportive, inclusive environment that enables me to give them my best, but actually is prepared to work with me as an adult rather than in a environment that is more control and command rather than being inclusive and based upon trust and inclusion.
I think in relation to age, the age profile of the CPS, I mean, so it's quite a middle-aged organisation. People tend to stay in the CPS quite a long time, so that's sort of the profile. And in fact, one of the things that has been sort of bothering me has been that when we think about the criminal justice system, that often people that get involved in the criminal justice system, both as victims and offenders, tend to be younger. And so I think there's a big issue for the CPS to engage more with young people. And a lot of our workplace and our apprentice schemes are around looking at younger people. I think the diversity point is really important. I think Jackie's point about seeing people that look like you, I think that's particularly important in the criminal justice system because of race disproportionality. So I have a colleague of mine who would have been here, who would have been an excellent speaker, Grace, who's a black chief crown prosecutor. I think it's really, and I know she does very proactive work with schools in the West Midlands. I think that's really important for that visible role model. People can think that actually I could do that job. So I think that's really important. But I think you do lay it, I'm really grateful for your question, because I am going to go away and think about what do we do about people that maybe are, retiring, and how could we engage with them in a different way. So it may not be exactly where our focus needs to be, but equally with an aging population, what we are also seeing is some offenders who are now older. And victims who are older too. We've just launched our consultation on crimes against older people that went live yesterday. So it is something for us to be thinking about, but I haven't got a more concrete answer in terms of what we're doing in relation to that. I think in relation to the sort of proudest or single achievement, it is quite hard. What I would say in this space is, I suppose the approach I've taken with the strategy now. And when I was doing a diversity role in the late 90s, and the CPS was in a very different place then. There were lots of race employment tribunal cases. The Commission for Racial Equality were threatening to come in and formally investigate the CPS because of those tribunal cases. At that time, the only other public authority that had had a formal investigation was the Army. And if you put that again in the context of race disproportionality, we'd just had the Macpherson report, which was saying that organisations were institutionally racist. That's the context in which I became diversity manager for the CPS. And my job was very much to provide a compelling plan so that they wouldn't investigate us, but sort of work alongside us. And we were able to get them to agree to that. But what we did, and I was really grateful, that's why I say the leadership's so important, because the then DPP and Chief Exec were absolutely committed to changing the organisation. They realised a lot needed to change, but we said we cannot just focus on race, we have to go broader. But we also said we needed a standalone diversity unit, and not for it to be part of HR at that time, because it wouldn't have the confidence of staff and it wouldn't have the confidence of stakeholders. And I think that set the scene, and future diversity directors went on and did an amazing job in, I think, putting the CPS in a really strong position and made us a very outward-facing organisation. So we were an organisation that when we were set up, we wouldn't talk to victims for fear that that would encroach upon our independence. And now we've become such an open organisation. I'm not saying we're complacent, there's always more that we can do. We can absolutely build on what we've done, and that's what our strategy is about. But I think there's something about when you get hold of this agenda, think big. So my brief this time, fast forward to last year, was to develop a community engagement strategy. That was it. That's not what we've got. We've got a strategy that looks at casework, community engagement and people across the board, and I want it to have an impact across the whole organisation. It goes back to that point I made about strategic significance. And so I think I feel proud of the fact that in this space I've been able to think big and persuade the leadership to go down that road.
Jackie?
Quite a provocative thought around ageing. We have an ageing population. It's probably the first time in forever that we have 4 generations in the workplace. We have to think about a culture where, again, it's about where everybody and everyone can be their best, and you harness the best of everyone. And experience is invaluable. Whether you have it long or short, experience is invaluable. And so for me, there's something about how we retool and reskill on an ongoing basis. To be able to make sure not just that the apprenticeship is geared towards young folks, but also geared towards an aging workforce. We retool and reskill in digital because it's an important part of what we do today. And in HMRC, what we do and what I do with my team is we have reverse mentoring, which is all about cross-pollinating ideas, how people think, to be able to bring together teams that have the best of everyone to achieve the best. And so for me, I think, I'll go back also and think about, am I doing enough? And what can I do more of to enable these generations to work better together and to harness the best of all? As it relates to my proudest moment, I think, Charlotte, you asked a question about proudest. I had to go through what I believe is really my proudest. And about 10 years ago, I was on a board that focused on social mobility and bridging the digital divide, which was about the haves and haves not, and making sure that everybody could participate in this digital world. And the demographics of the folks were people who, young mothers, those who are less fortunate, for whatever reason may have deviated, and how do we make them products of society? And I worked with them to create a digital curricula that would help focus on what are the early careers that you can get, regardless, you don't have to have a degree, but you can become digitally adept and then start to participate in society. And I created that curricula, and I went back to my organization and said, okay, I've created this curricula, we have a pipeline. And the organization said, well, we already have this. We have interns, we have, school placements. And I said, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those who ordinarily would not have come to this organization. And I pushed really hard to the top of the organization, to HR, and said, let's just try it out just a little bit, and let's see what we can do. And so we tried it out, and it was a learning experience, not just for them, but for the people who manage these folks, because some of these children came in, they didn't know how to dress. Some of them walked miles to come to work because of the things that they had to overcome. Some had young children and, single mothers, etc. But that first cohort created a movement around doing this. And today, my organization that I left is the largest in terms of input and intake for these individuals. And so for me, my proudest moment is to create something that is sustainable, something where I can see that we can bridge this divide, and if we do it at pace and we do it at scale, it'll be something that's good for society. And for me, that's my proudest moment. I could be the most senior person, I could make the most, but that's not what it's about. It's this thing that for me, that was my most proudest.
I think that's a good high to leave us on there. So thank you very much indeed to all of our panellists. And before I move us on to the final session for today, perhaps you would all just join me in thanking them.
Nice to meet you, guys.